The courtroom was colder than it looked. Bright lights reflected off the wooden benches, and the faint sound of shuffling papers filled the air. People were talking in low voices, waiting for the next case to begin. It was just another morning for everyone there, except for one person. A young teenager stood quietly near the door, holding a thin file in his hands. His clothes were simple and his sneakers were a little worn out. He looked nervous but also strangely calm, as if he had been preparing for this moment for a long time. People glanced at him as they passed, assuming he was there to watch or maybe support someone. The bailiff noticed him standing alone and asked softly, "Son, are you lost? You're not supposed to be in here without a guardian." The boy shook his head. "I'm here for the hearing," he said quietly. The bailiff frowned. "You mean you're here with someone?" The boy hesitated for a second, then answered, "I'm here to represent my brother." That caught the bailiff by surprise. He looked the boy up and down, then laughed a little as if it was a joke. "Represent? Like a lawyer?" The boy nodded slowly. "Yes, sir." The bailiff didn't say more, but his face showed clear disbelief. He just pointed to a seat near the front and said, "Sit there until your case is called." The boy sat down, clutching the file tightly in his hands. He didn't look around much. He could feel people staring, whispering. A couple of lawyers nearby were whispering to each other, smirking. "Kids these days," one of them said under his breath. The boy pretended not to hear. His eyes stayed fixed on the wooden table where the lawyers stood to speak. He had seen that table many times before. He knew what it meant. He had been to court before, not as a lawyer, not even as a witness, but as someone sitting in the back, watching quietly. His mother used to work as a legal assistant, and she often brought him along when she couldn't afford a babysitter. He used to do his homework while hearings went on. Over time, he started listening, picking up the words, the rhythm of the arguments, the tone lawyers used when they were confident and when they were scared. He remembered all of it. Now he was here for real. His older brother had been accused of vandalizing a local store, something he hadn't done. No lawyer wanted the case because it seemed small and unwinnable. The store owner was influential, and the evidence looked bad on paper. The boy couldn't afford to hire anyone else, so he decided to step up himself. He knew it was risky, but he had to try. He had spent weeks reading about laws, procedures, and cases late into the night. He didn't sleep much, but he was ready. The courtroom doors opened, and everyone stood as the judge walked in. The sound of the gavel hitting the desk echoed. "Court is now in session," the clerk announced. The judge was an older man with sharp eyes and a voice that filled the room. He looked around, as if measuring everyone before him. "Let's begin," he said. One by one, the cases went by. People spoke, lawyers argued, papers were handed over. Finally, the clerk called the next case, his brother's name. The boy stood up, his heart pounding. He walked to the front and placed his file on the defense table. The judge looked up, expecting an attorney. Instead, he saw a teenager. "Where's your lawyer?" the judge asked. "I'll be representing my brother, Your Honor," the boy said, trying to sound steady. The judge blinked. Then a short laugh escaped him. "Representing him? You're joking, right?" "No, Your Honor," the boy replied, standing straight. "I've studied the case. I'm ready to proceed." A ripple of laughter ran through the room. A few people shook their heads. The prosecutor smirked and whispered something to the clerk. Even the bailiff smiled a little, though he tried to hide it. The judge leaned back in his chair and gave a half smile. "You know this isn't a school debate, right? This is a real courtroom. You can't just walk in and play lawyer." "I understand that, sir," the boy said politely. "But my brother deserves to be heard. If you'll allow me to speak, I believe I can prove his innocence." The judge sighed, glancing at the bailiff as if to ask if this was real. "Kid, do you even know what evidence is? What cross-examination means?" "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "I've read everything I need to. I've studied this case for weeks." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You've read? That's not how law works, son." The boy didn't back down. Then please, let me show you how it works for me. The judge sat quietly for a few seconds. Maybe he thought it would be funny to let the kid try and fail. Maybe he was curious. Whatever the reason, he finally said, "Fine, you have 5 minutes. Let's see what you've got." The boy nodded, opened his file, and began to speak. His voice trembled at first, but then it grew steadier. He described the night of the incident, how his brother had been at home during the time the vandalism happened. He mentioned witnesses, small details that weren't in the police report. He talked about how the camera footage the store owner claimed to have was never verified properly. He pointed out inconsistencies, mistakes in the paperwork, things only someone very observant would notice. At first, no one took him seriously. But then, something changed. The courtroom grew quieter. The judge leaned forward, his expression no longer amused. The prosecutor looked uncomfortable. The boy wasn't just reciting facts. He was reasoning, connecting dots, building logic step by step. He even quoted sections of local law correctly. His calmness didn't seem rehearsed. It came from confidence. The judge interrupted him once. "Where did you learn this?" "My mother used to work for a lawyer," the boy said softly. "I spent years helping her with documents, organizing case files. I've seen how these things go." The judge didn't respond. He just nodded slowly and gestured for him to continue. When the boy finished his short statement, the courtroom was silent. The judge didn't speak for a few seconds, then said quietly, "You've done your homework. I'll give you that." The boy bowed his head slightly. "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge cleared his throat. "But this isn't enough. You'll need to provide actual evidence, not just words. Can you do that?" "Yes, Your Honor, I can," he said firmly. The judge looked surprised again. "Very well. I'll allow you to return tomorrow with your evidence. We'll continue this then." He banged the gavel lightly. The session was over. As the courtroom emptied, people kept glancing at the boy, whispering among themselves. Some looked amused, others curious. A few even seemed impressed. The prosecutor walked past him and said under his breath, "You got lucky today, kid. Don't expect it to last." The boy didn't answer. He just gathered his papers and walked out with quiet determination. Outside, the air felt warmer. He sat on a bench near the steps, finally letting out a deep breath. His brother came running up, eyes wide. "I can't believe you actually talked in there," he said, still shocked. The judge looked like he didn't know what to do. The boy smiled faintly. "He didn't believe me," he said. "But that's okay. Tomorrow he will." His brother sat beside him, still nervous. "You really think we can win?" "I don't know," the boy said honestly. "But I know the truth." That's a start. He spent the rest of the day at the library. The sun went down, but he stayed, flipping through pages of old casebooks and law summaries. He copied notes by hand, highlighting sections he thought could help. Every once in a while he paused and took a deep breath, replaying the judge's mocking smile in his mind. It didn't make him angry. It made him more determined. He remembered watching his mother years ago, crying quietly after losing a case she knew was unfair. She had always told him that truth didn't always win, but it deserved a voice. That's what he wanted to be, a voice for truth. Not for fame, not for pride, but for the people who didn't get a chance to be heard. That night his mother called from her night shift at work. "I heard you went to court," she said, her voice full of concern. "I did," he admitted. "I represented him myself." She was silent for a moment. "You did what?" "I had to, Mom. Nobody else would help. But it went okay. The judge gave us another day." She sighed softly. "I don't know whether to be proud or worried. Maybe both," he said with a small laugh. "But I'll be fine." After hanging up, he went back to his notes. His hands were tired, but he kept writing until midnight. Every argument, every fact, every possible question the prosecutor might ask, he wrote them all down. He didn't want to leave anything to chance. The next morning he walked to court again. The same people were there, the bailiff, the lawyers, the judge. This time, when he walked in, a few people looked up in recognition. Some even whispered his name quietly. The judge noticed him immediately. "You came back," the judge said, sounding half amused, half impressed. "Yes, Your Honor," the boy said, bowing his head slightly. "And I brought what you asked for." The judge studied him for a moment, then said, "You've got courage, I'll give you that. Let's see if it's backed by proof." The boy placed his files on the table, neatly arranged, labeled, and marked. He had collected witness statements, timestamps, and even store camera footage he'd requested from a nearby cafe. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough to raise questions. The judge flipped through the pages, his expression slowly changing from skepticism to quiet interest. "You did all this on your own?" he asked. "Yes, sir," the boy said. The judge leaned back in his chair. "Well, I'll be damned," he murmured under his breath, just loud enough for the clerk to hear. As the proceedings began, the judge wasn't mocking anymore. The boy noticed the difference. For the first time, he was being listened to, not as a child, but as someone who had earned that attention. He didn't win the case that day. That would come later. But something had changed in that courtroom. The laughter had stopped. The whispers had quieted. The people who had once doubted him now watched with respect, even a bit of awe. When he walked out of the courtroom that afternoon, the sunlight felt different. He had faced something bigger than himself and stood his ground. He had been mocked, doubted, and tested, but he didn't give up. He smiled quietly, knowing this was only the beginning. The real fight and the real respect were yet to come. The courtroom was quieter than usual that morning. The same faces filled the wooden benches, but something felt different in the air. People remembered the boy from the previous day, the teenager who had dared to stand before a judge and speak like a lawyer. Some came early just to see what would happen next. The guards, the clerks, even a few lawyers couldn't hide their curiosity. No one could forget how calm he had been under pressure, how he had spoken facts instead of fear. He sat quietly at the defense table again, his notes stacked neatly before him. He had barely slept the night before, his eyes heavy but focused. He went over every page one more time, his fingers trembling slightly, not from fear but from determination. His brother sat behind him, whispering, "You don't have to do this alone, you know." The boy gave a faint smile. "I know, but I have to see it through." When the judge entered, everyone rose. The sound of the gavel echoed again, commanding attention. The judge glanced at the teenager, and this time there was no smirk on his face. Just quiet observation. "You came prepared, I see," he said. "Yes, Your Honor," the boy replied respectfully. "Let's begin," the judge said, signaling the clerk. The prosecutor walked in confidently, adjusting his tie, a thin smile playing on his lips. He was experienced and clever, and it showed in the way he carried himself. He looked at the boy like a man who had already won. "Ready for another round of play court?" he said quietly. The boy ignored him, flipping to the first page of his file. The case began with the prosecutor presenting his evidence again, reading from the police report, pointing at the photos of the damaged store, and stating that the boy's brother had been seen nearby that night. He spoke with practiced confidence, looking toward the judge with every sentence as if to say, "This is obvious." When he finished, he turned to the teenager. "Your turn, counselor," he said sarcastically. The boy stood up slowly. His heart was beating fast, but his voice was calm. "Your Honor," he began, "yesterday I said there were details in this case that didn't add up. I'd like to show you what I meant." He walked to the evidence table with a small USB drive in his hand. The bailiff took it and connected it to the screen. "This is footage from a camera across the street belonging to a cafe," the boy said. "It was never reviewed by the police because they thought it was too far from the crime scene. But it wasn't. The video began to play. It showed the street outside the store on the night of the incident. People were walking, cars passing. The store sign was visible in the distance. A figure appeared near it, hooded, carrying a bag. The image wasn't perfectly clear, but it showed enough." The boy paused the video at one point. "This is the moment the vandalism happened," he said. "Now please look at the time on the footage, 9:47 p.m. He picked up another paper. "And this," he continued, "is a receipt from a small restaurant across town. My brother bought food there at exactly 9:45 p.m. It takes at least 20 minutes to reach the store from that location. It's impossible for him to be in both places. The judge leaned forward, studying the papers and the screen. The prosecutor tried to interrupt. The footage is unclear, he said quickly. We can't even see the suspect's face. That's true, the boy replied calmly. But look at the height and the build. The person in the video is taller and heavier than my brother. Even the way he walks is different. I also have a statement from the restaurant staff confirming the time on the receipt. He handed over a signed note to the clerk. The judge's expression had changed again. He wasn't mocking anymore, he was interested. Did you gather all this yourself? He asked. Yes, Your Honor. I went to the cafe and requested the footage. They were kind enough to help. The restaurant manager gave me the statement. The judge nodded slowly, turning to the prosecutor. Did your office review this material before? The prosecutor cleared his throat. No, Your Honor, we didn't consider that angle. The judge said nothing for a long moment. Then he looked back at the boy. Continue, the teenager went on, explaining how the shop owner's original statement had small inconsistencies. The timing didn't match, and the damages listed in the report were exaggerated compared to the photos. He spoke with confidence, not arrogance. Every sentence had purpose. Every pause was timed perfectly. He wasn't reading. He was reasoning. People in the courtroom listened intently. Even those who had laughed the day before now sat still. The judge didn't interrupt. He just watched, occasionally jotting something in his notebook. The boy ended by saying softly, I'm not asking you to take my word for it. I'm asking you to look at the facts. The truth doesn't need a fancy degree to be seen. It just needs attention. For a moment there was silence. Then the judge took off his glasses and rubbed his forehead. I've been on this bench for 20 years, he said finally. I've seen many lawyers stand where you are now. Some have made brilliant arguments, others not so much. But what you've done here today, he paused, almost smiling. It's remarkable. The boy didn't know what to say. He just stood there quietly, his hands clasped together. The judge leaned forward again. You realize, of course, that even if this case goes in your favor, you can't legally act as a lawyer. Yes, Your Honor, the boy said. I'm not trying to be one. I'm just trying to help my brother. The judge studied him for another moment before saying, You're doing a fine job of that. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably, sensing the change in mood. Your Honor, I'd like a short recess to review the new material. The judge nodded. Granted. As people began to stand, soft chatter filled the room. The boy sat back down, exhaling deeply. His brother touched his shoulder and whispered, You did amazing, he smiled faintly. It's not over yet. During the recess, the prosecutor sat at his desk, flipping through the new evidence. His assistant whispered something in his ear, and he nodded grimly. Across the room, a few lawyers came up to the boy. One of them, older and kind-looking, said, You've got talent, kid. Where'd you learn to speak like that? The boy smiled politely. I just listened a lot. My mom used to bring me to court when she worked for an attorney. I learned from watching. The lawyer chuckled softly. Well, keep watching. You've got something rare. When court resumed, the judge looked more serious than before. We'll continue with the questioning, he said. Prosecution, proceed. The prosecutor called the store owner to the stand. The man looked uneasy. The boy watched him carefully, every small movement, every hesitation. The prosecutor began asking simple questions about the night, the damages, what he saw. The store owner answered, but his tone wasn't confident. There were small pauses, nervous glances. Then it was the boy's turn. He stood holding his notepad. His hands were steady this time. Sir, he said politely, you mentioned seeing my brother near your store that night.
How far were you when you saw him?
The man frowned slightly. About 20 feet. Was it dark outside? Yes. Did you have your glasses on? The man hesitated. No, I don't wear them all the time. Did you see his face clearly? The man's voice lowered. Not clearly, no. But I recognized the jacket. The jacket, the boy repeated, walking slowly. You mean this one? He held up a photo of a blue jacket, the one the police had taken as evidence. Do you know how many people in this neighborhood own the same style? I'm not sure, the man said, shifting in his seat. Would you say 10? 20? Maybe more? The man sighed. Yes, maybe more. So you didn't see his face. You just assumed it was him because of the jacket? The store owner didn't reply. The judge watched carefully. The boy's voice was calm but sharp, not disrespectful. He wasn't trying to embarrass the witness. He was trying to reveal the truth. "Thank you," the boy said finally. "No further questions." When the man stepped down, the prosecutor looked uneasy. He whispered something quickly to his assistant. The judge leaned back and said, "I think we've heard enough for today. I'll review everything and reconvene tomorrow." The sound of the gavel ended the session. People began talking immediately, their voices full of surprise and admiration. The boy gathered his things quietly, keeping his head low. As he walked toward the exit, the judge called out, "Young man?" He stopped and turned. "You've surprised me twice now," the judge said, smiling faintly. "You remind me of why I joined this profession, to see the truth defended with honesty, not ego. Keep going." "Thank you, Your Honor," the boy said softly. Outside the courthouse, the air was cool. Reporters had started to gather, curious about the teen lawyer. They called out questions, but he didn't stop to answer. He wasn't looking for fame or attention. He just wanted his brother free. At home that evening, his brother hugged him tightly. "You really changed everything in there," he said. "The judge looked at you differently today." The boy smiled tiredly. He looked at the truth differently. That's what matters. He went to his small desk and opened his notebook again. He had already started preparing for the next day, writing down new points, checking details he might have missed. He knew this wasn't over yet. One mistake could undo everything. His mother came home late that night, exhausted from work. She found him asleep on his papers, the lamp still on. She gently brushed his hair aside and whispered, "You've done enough for one day." She looked at the notes he had written, the careful handwriting, the underlined sections. She smiled proudly, tears filling her eyes. "Your father would have been proud," she whispered. The next morning, the boy woke early again, ready to face the next challenge. He didn't care about the stares or whispers anymore. He had something stronger than fear now. Belief. Belief in what he was doing. Belief in his brother's innocence, and belief that the truth could still matter in a place where it was often forgotten. The day ahead would test him in new ways. But as he walked toward the courthouse, his steps were steady. He was no longer just a boy trying to help. He was someone who had earned a place in that room, even if no one had given it to him. The morning light spilled softly through the courthouse windows as the boy walked in again. The whispers started almost immediately. People were now expecting him. The teenager who had stood his ground against a seasoned prosecutor had become the quiet talk of the town. Clerks smiled when they saw him. The bailiff nodded in acknowledgement, and even a few lawyers looked at him with something that resembled respect. The change in atmosphere was subtle, but he could feel it. He walked with slow, careful steps, holding his file close to his chest. His brother followed behind, looking both proud and anxious. "You sure you're ready for today?" he whispered. The boy nodded. "More than ever. Today I'll make them see everything clearly." They took their usual seat at the defense table. The judge wasn't in yet, but the courtroom was already filling up. A local news reporter sat near the back, notebook in hand, ready to record every word. A few law students had also come, curious to watch the unusual case everyone was talking about. The boy didn't pay attention to any of that. He just stared at his notes, repeating his arguments silently in his mind. When the judge entered, the courtroom stood. His steps were firm, but his face carried a faint smile, something almost rare. He sat down, looked at the boy, and said, "You've become quite the attraction, haven't you?" The boy bowed his head slightly. "I didn't mean to, Your Honor." The judge chuckled softly. "Don't worry. Court isn't a place for popularity, it's a place for truth. Let's see if you can keep up the good work." The prosecutor looked tired today, maybe from the pressure of all the attention. He shuffled his papers, avoiding eye contact with the boy. When the judge asked if both sides were ready, they both said yes, and the proceedings began. The prosecutor started first again, trying to regain control. He spoke louder this time, emphasizing details and using strong words. He even questioned the validity of the new evidence the boy had brought. "Your Honor," he said, "while the defendant's brother has shown enthusiasm, we must remember this is not a law school exercise. Evidence must be verified properly. The video could have been edited. The statements could be fabricated. The boy listened patiently, not interrupting. When it was his turn to speak, he stood up calmly and said, "If the prosecution doubts the authenticity, I can show the original footage. It's still saved on the cafe's computer. The manager is here today to confirm that." A middle-aged man stood from the back, holding his hat nervously. "Yes, Your Honor," he said. "The boy came to me himself and asked for the footage. It's genuine, I've verified it myself." The judge nodded. "That settles that. Continue." The boy opened another page in his notes. "There's something else I want to show, Your Honor," he said, holding up 2 photos. "These were taken on the night of the incident by a nearby traffic camera. I requested copies through public records. They show a person running away from the store. But if you look closely at the reflection in the glass, you'll see he's wearing white sneakers." He paused and lifted his brother's foot slightly. "My brother doesn't own any white shoes. He wears black ones for work. Always has." The judge took the photos and examined them carefully. He compared them to the ones in the police report. "The ones in the file show dark shoes," the judge said. "Yes, Your Honor," the boy replied, "because those were taken the next morning when the police came to question him. He wasn't wearing the same clothes. The report assumed it was him, but it never matched details properly." The courtroom was quiet. Even the prosecutor had no quick comeback. The boy continued, his tone steady but full of quiet passion. "If we start assuming instead of checking facts, innocent people get punished. My brother could lose his future because of assumptions. That's not justice." The judge watched him carefully, his fingers resting on his chin. The prosecutor finally spoke up. "Even if what he says is true, Your Honor, we still can't ignore the witness who identified the brother near the store." The boy nodded. "That's true. But that witness admitted yesterday that he didn't see clearly. He only thought it was him because of the jacket, and that jacket," he reached into his bag and pulled out a folded paper, "was part of a bulk sale at a local shop. I asked the owner for records. He sold over 30 jackets of that same kind last month." The judge raised his eyebrows. "You really did your research?" The boy smiled faintly. "I had to. My brother's future depends on it." People in the courtroom exchanged glances. Even the prosecutor's assistant whispered something like, "He's incredible." The judge leaned back and said, "You know, if you ever decide to study law for real, you'll make quite a name for yourself." The boy lowered his eyes. "Thank you, Your Honor. But for now I just want my brother to get a fair chance." The judge nodded. "Fair enough. You've certainly earned that chance. Let's take a short break." As the courtroom began to clear for the break, the boy sat down, exhaling deeply. His hands were trembling a little. His brother leaned close and whispered, "You're doing it. You're actually doing it." The boy smiled softly. "It's not over yet. The hardest part is still ahead." During the break, the judge stepped into his chambers. He spoke quietly to his clerk, asking for the official files and records of the case. He seemed thoughtful, maybe even a little troubled. For years, he had seen cases where justice was blurred by bias or shortcuts. This case was reminding him of something he had forgotten, why truth mattered more than procedure. Back in the main hall, the prosecutor sat quietly at his table. His expression was unreadable. The boy didn't look at him. He was too focused on his notes. He wasn't doing this to win an argument. He was doing this to clear his brother's name. That was all that mattered. When the judge returned, everyone stood again. He looked more serious now. "We'll hear the remaining evidence," he said. "Defense, proceed." The boy nodded and walked to the stand with a small folder in hand. He opened it slowly and said, "Your Honor, I also found something unusual in the police report. The time of arrest doesn't match the time of the alleged incident. The vandalism happened at 9:47 p.m., but the report says my brother was arrested at 9:50 p.m., just 3 minutes later and almost 2 miles away. That's not possible without a car, and he doesn't own one." The judge frowned, flipping through the report. "He's right," he said. The timeline doesn't make sense. The prosecutor shifted uncomfortably. Perhaps there was a mistake in recording the time. The judge looked up sharply. A mistake? That's a serious mistake to make. We're talking about a person's freedom here. The boy didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. The judge sighed and leaned back in his chair. I'm starting to wonder if this case should have been brought here at all, he said quietly. The courtroom murmured softly. The prosecutor's face tightened. Your Honor, if I may, this entire case has become about theatrics rather than facts. We cannot rely on a teenager's investigations, the boy spoke up calmly. Then why not verify them, sir? Every place I mentioned, every person I talked to, they're all real. The truth doesn't change just because I'm younger than you. The words hit harder than expected. Even the judge couldn't hide a small smile. He's right, counselor, the judge said. Truth doesn't care about age. For the next hour, the courtroom listened to witness statements that confirmed the boy's findings. The cafe manager, the restaurant staff, even a neighbor who had seen the brother at home that night, all spoke clearly and confidently. Piece by piece, the truth was unfolding, and it wasn't in the prosecution's favor. By the end of the day, everyone could sense where this was heading. The judge finally said, I've heard enough for today. Both sides will rest and I'll deliver my ruling tomorrow morning. The sound of the gavel echoed once again. As people started to leave, a few came up to the boy and patted his shoulder, offering quiet words of encouragement. He smiled politely but said little. His brother hugged him outside the courtroom, his eyes filled with emotion. No matter what happens tomorrow, he said, I'll never forget what you did for me. The boy smiled back. You don't have to. We'll both remember this day. That night, he sat by the window in his small room, staring at the faint glow of streetlights outside. He should have felt relieved, but he couldn't stop thinking. What if he missed something? What if there was another trick the prosecution might try? He couldn't sleep until he had checked every line of his notes again. He went over the witness statements one more time, then flipped through the photos. His mind replayed every word from the judge, every expression, every hesitation. Somewhere deep down, he felt that tomorrow would change everything, not just for his brother, but for him too. As the clock ticked past midnight, his mother walked in quietly, carrying a cup of tea. She placed it beside him and sat on the edge of his bed. You're still up? She asked softly. He nodded. I just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. She smiled gently. You've done more than anyone could have expected. No matter what happens tomorrow, you've already won something bigger. He looked at her curiously. What's that? Respect, she said. The kind you can't buy or demand. You earn it, and you've earned it. He smiled faintly, sipping the tea. The warmth spread through him, calming his nerves a little. Do you think the judge believes me? He asked. I think he believes in what you're fighting for, she said, and that's enough. The next morning came faster than he expected. He woke before dawn, dressed neatly, and reviewed his notes one last time. When he looked in the mirror, he didn't see a scared teenager anymore. He saw someone stronger, someone who had found his voice. At the courthouse, the air was tense. Reporters stood outside waiting for the verdict. The boy ignored them and walked straight in. The judge was already there, papers in hand. The courtroom filled quickly, everyone waiting for the final moment. As the judge began speaking, the boy felt his heartbeat slow. He listened carefully to every word. The judge reviewed the evidence point by point, acknowledging the inconsistencies and new facts. Then he looked up and said, This court finds insufficient evidence to convict the defendant. The charges are dismissed. For a moment, no one moved. Then a soft gasp spread through the courtroom. The boy's brother covered his face, overcome with relief. The judge continued, Before we close, I'd like to say something. I've been doing this for a long time, but this case reminded me that justice doesn't always come from the most experienced. It sometimes comes from the most determined. Young man, you have shown remarkable courage and intelligence. Don't waste it. The boy bowed slightly, his throat tight with emotion. Thank you, Your Honor, he said softly. As he walked out of the courtroom, people clapped quietly, a rare sight in that place. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but he didn't stop. His brother hugged him tightly on the courthouse steps, whispering, "You did it. You really did it." The boy smiled, looking up at the bright sky. "No," he said gently. "We did." And somewhere behind them, the judge stood at his window watching them leave. For the first time in years, he felt something deep inside. Hope. Hope that maybe the next generation would protect the justice system better than his own had, and that a young boy armed with nothing but truth could still remind the world what honesty looked like. The sun had already climbed high when the boy and his brother walked out of the courthouse that morning. The weight that had been sitting on their shoulders for weeks was finally gone. The air felt lighter, the sky looked bluer, and every breath seemed easier. Reporters were still waiting outside, microphones and cameras in hand, asking the same questions over and over. "How did you do it? Where did you learn all that?" But the boy didn't stop to answer. He wasn't looking for fame or praise. All he wanted was to take his brother home. They walked past the flashing cameras, past the shouting voices, until the crowd faded behind them. When they reached the street corner, his brother turned to him and said quietly, "You saved me." The boy smiled faintly. "No, you saved yourself. I just showed them the truth." They both laughed softly, and for the first time in a long time it was real laughter, the kind that comes when fear finally disappears. At home, their mother waited by the door. Her eyes were red from crying, but her face carried the warmest smile. When she saw them, she didn't say anything. She just hugged both her sons tightly. "I told you," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Truth always wins." The boy closed his eyes, holding on to that moment. For days, their house had been filled with silence, fear, and endless worry. Now that silence was replaced by something beautiful, relief. But even as the family celebrated, the story wasn't over. The judge who had once mocked the boy couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. Back in his office, he sat at his desk, staring at the case files. The boy's words echoed in his mind. Truth doesn't care about age. He picked up the phone and called the court administrator. "Find out where that boy goes to school," he said. "And also, see if there are any youth programs for law or public service. I think he deserves a chance." The next few days were quiet for the boy. He tried to return to his normal life, going to school, helping his mother at home, and spending time with his brother. But something inside him had changed. Every time he looked at a newspaper or heard about someone being treated unfairly, he felt a spark. The same one that had pushed him to fight in court. One afternoon, while sitting in the library, a man in a neat suit walked up to his table. He looked official, carrying a file and a polite smile. "Are you the young man from the courthouse case?" he asked. The boy hesitated. "Yes, sir." The man sat down. "The judge asked me to give you this." He handed him an envelope and said, "He said you might be interested." Then he stood up, nodded respectfully, and left. The boy opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a letter. It wasn't long, but every word carried weight. "Young man, what you did in that courtroom reminded everyone of what justice truly means. I have recommended you for a scholarship in our youth legal mentorship program. It's not just about learning the law, it's about using it for good. If you accept, it will be an honor to guide you further." The letter was signed by the judge. The boy stared at it for a long moment, his heart beating fast. He had never thought something like this could happen. He had walked into that courtroom just to save his brother. Now someone wanted to teach him how to do it for others. That evening, he showed the letter to his mother. Her eyes filled with tears again, but this time they were tears of pride. "You see?" she said softly. "Even people who doubted you can see your worth now." He nodded slowly. "I want to do it," he said. "If I can help someone else like I helped my brother, I want to learn how." The next week, he started attending the mentorship program. It was in a nearby city courthouse, where young students were taught about law, logic, and ethics. Most of the participants were older than him, and some already knew a lot about the subject. On his first day, he felt nervous. The classrooms were filled with people talking confidently about laws and rules, and he sat quietly at the back. But when the instructor asked each student why they joined, the boy spoke simply. "Because I saw someone innocent almost lose everything," he said, "and I never want to see that again." The room went silent for a moment. Even the instructor looked impressed. "That's a powerful reason," he said, "and probably the best one I've heard in a long time." Days turned into weeks. The boy learned quickly. He read every book he could find, asked endless questions, and watched real hearings to understand how lawyers thought. The judge visited once a week, sometimes sitting quietly in the back, sometimes giving advice. He had stopped seeing the boy as just a curious teenager. Now he saw him as someone with potential, someone who could bring heart and honesty to a system that often forgot those things. One day after class, the judge called the boy aside. "You know," he said, "you reminded me of myself when I was young. Back then I wanted to change everything, but somewhere along the way I stopped believing I could. Watching you in that courtroom made me believe again." The boy looked at him, unsure what to say. "Thank you, sir. I was just doing what I thought was right." "And that," the judge said, "is exactly what this world needs more of." Word of the boy's story spread quietly through the legal community. A few journalists wrote short articles about the teen who outsmarted the system. Some praised his courage, while others debated how a child could have handled such a complex case. But the boy ignored all that noise. He didn't want fame. He wanted purpose. At home, his brother had started working again. He was more careful now, more serious about his job. "I'm not wasting the second chance you gave me," he told his little brother one night. "You believed in me when no one else did. Now it's my turn to believe in you." Their mother watched them both, her heart full. For the first time in years, their small home felt peaceful, not because everything was perfect, but because hope had returned. Months passed. The boy continued to attend the mentorship sessions and occasionally helped lawyers prepare case notes. The judge would sometimes ask for his opinion on hypothetical cases. He never gave him special treatment, but his tone was always filled with respect. One morning, the judge invited him to observe a real trial in another city. It wasn't a high-profile case, but it was serious enough. The boy watched quietly as lawyers presented their arguments. He noticed their mistakes, how they missed small details or failed to ask the right questions. The judge beside him whispered, "See that? That's why facts matter more than performance." The boy nodded, remembering his own trial. "I understand," he said softly. After the hearing, as they walked out of the courtroom, the judge said, "You have something rare. Empathy and logic together. Don't lose that. If you ever decide to study law formally, I'll write you a recommendation myself." The boy smiled. "I'll hold you to that, sir." But not everyone was pleased with how things had turned out. The prosecutor from the case had faced criticism for being outsmarted by a teenager. Some people mocked him. Others questioned his professionalism. His pride was deeply hurt. One afternoon, he walked into the judge's office, his face tense. "You made a fool out of me," he said bitterly. "You let that kid turn the courtroom into a circus." The judge looked up calmly. "He didn't make a fool of you. The truth did. You just ignored it." The prosecutor clenched his jaw but said nothing. He turned and left, but the sting of those words stayed with him. The boy didn't know about this conversation. He was too busy focusing on his studies and helping others. A few months later, a local newspaper published a story about a poor family who couldn't afford a lawyer for their teenage son. He had been accused of something he didn't do, stealing a bicycle. When the boy read that article, something inside him stirred. It felt familiar. He printed the story and showed it to his mother. "Do you think I could help them?" he asked. She looked at him with gentle eyes. "You already know the answer." The next day, he went to the address mentioned in the paper. The family was surprised to see him. They recognized him immediately, the young man from the famous court case. The boy explained that he wasn't a lawyer, but he could help gather information and talk to someone who might take the case seriously. He spent the next few days talking to shopkeepers, checking security cameras and asking witnesses, just like he had done before. Eventually, he found proof that the accused boy had been at a different place entirely when the theft happened. He gathered everything neatly and brought it to the judge. "I know I shouldn't interfere," he said, "but this boy doesn't deserve to be punished for something he didn't do." The judge looked through the papers, nodding slowly. "You really can't stop, can you?" The boy smiled shyly. "Not when I see something wrong." The judge sighed but smiled too. "All right. Leave this with me. I'll make sure the right people see it." 2 weeks later, the charges against that boy were dropped. The local newspaper reported the update. "Teen helps another teen clear his name." People started calling him the young voice of justice. It wasn't a title he asked for, but it followed him everywhere. One evening, while sitting with his mother, she said, "You know, you've already become what you wanted, someone who stands for the truth." He smiled. "Maybe, but I still have a lot to learn." She nodded. "And that's exactly why you'll go far." The judge watched all of this quietly, always proud but never interfering too much. He wanted the boy to find his own path, but deep down he already knew. This young man was destined for something greater than anyone had imagined. And as the year ended, the boy stood outside the courthouse once again, not as a defendant's brother, not as a frightened teenager, but as someone who had changed the hearts of people far older than him. The same building that once felt cold and distant now seemed warm. It wasn't just a place of judgment anymore. For him, it had become a place of truth. He took a deep breath, looked at the grand old doors, and smiled quietly to himself. This was only the beginning. Months had passed since that unforgettable day when the boy helped clear another innocent kid's name. Life had begun to settle into a calm rhythm again, but something deep within him had changed permanently. He could no longer walk past a courtroom without feeling a pull, a sense of belonging. He didn't just want to study law anymore. He felt like he was born for it. Every time he looked at his reflection, he no longer saw the shy boy who once stood trembling before a judge. Now he saw someone with purpose, a young man who understood how powerful truth could be when spoken with courage. One afternoon, as he sat at his small desk surrounded by open books and scattered papers, there was a knock at the door. His mother opened it, and to her surprise, the judge himself was standing there, holding a brown folder. He smiled politely. "May I come in?" She nodded, still a little stunned. "Of course, Your Honor, please." The boy quickly stood up, nervous but excited. He hadn't seen the judge outside the courthouse before. The man stepped in, looked around the modest home, and smiled gently. "I wanted to visit," he said. "And I wanted to give you this." He handed the boy the folder. Inside was an official letter and a few printed documents. The boy read the heading slowly. National Youth Legal Scholars Program, Scholarship Award. He blinked in surprise. "Is this real?" The judge nodded. "Very real. I submitted your name myself. They were impressed by your story, but more than that, they were moved by your honesty. It's a full scholarship for your education and your future training." The boy's mother covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered. The judge smiled warmly. "Don't thank me. Thank your son. He earned this with his integrity." The boy stood there silently, overwhelmed. The judge placed a hand on his shoulder. "You have a rare gift, and not just your mind but your heart. The system needs people like you. Use this chance wisely." After the judge left, the house was filled with a quiet joy. The boy read the letter again and again, almost afraid it might disappear if he blinked too long. That night he lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying everything. The laughter in the courtroom, the gavel striking, the judge's words. It all led to this moment. When morning came, he went for a walk through the park near his house. The air was cool and calm, and the city was just waking up. He sat on a bench and watched the people passing by, some rushing to work, others walking their dogs, children heading to school. For the first time, he realized something simple but powerful. He wanted to protect these ordinary people, the ones who couldn't fight for themselves. That day, he made a promise to himself. He would never let fear or doubt stop him from standing for what was right. As the weeks passed, preparations for his scholarship began. The program would start in a different city, one much larger and busier than where he grew up. Leaving home wasn't easy. His mother tried to hide her tears as she helped him pack. "You're going to do great things," she said softly. He smiled. "I'll come back and visit every chance I get." His brother handed him a small notebook. "You'll need this," he said, "to write down your victories." The boy laughed. "What if I fail sometimes?" "Then write those too," his brother replied, "so you remember how to get back up." When the day finally came, they all went with him to the bus station. The judge was there too, waiting near the gate. He shook the boy's hand firmly. "Remember," he said, "justice isn't about winning arguments. It's about finding truth even when it's inconvenient." The boy nodded. "I'll remember that." The bus ride was long, but his heart was full. As the countryside passed outside the window, he thought about everything he'd been through. The courtroom, the fear, the determination. He realized something else. He had started this journey for his brother, but it had become much bigger than that. When he arrived in the new city, he was nervous. The streets were wider, the buildings taller, and the people faster. Everything moved differently. The first few days were hard. New faces, new lessons, and endless rules. But he didn't give up. Whenever things felt too difficult, he remembered that courtroom, how he stood alone and still made a difference. At the program, he met other students from across the country. Some were brilliant, some confident, some quiet like him. They studied real cases, practiced speeches, and even visited law firms. But what set him apart wasn't how much he knew. It was how much he cared. When others argued for points, he argued for people. One of the mentors noticed this and said to him one day, "You don't just think like a lawyer. You feel like one. That's what makes you special." Years passed faster than he expected. With every lesson, he grew stronger and more focused. He studied late into the nights, helped others when they struggled, and always stayed humble. The judge would write to him occasionally, reminding him to stay grounded. Success, one of his letters said, isn't about being admired. It's about being useful. Eventually, the day came when he graduated from the program. As he stood on stage wearing the same modest suit he had worn to court years ago, the crowd applauded. Among them sat his mother, his brother, and the judge, all watching proudly. When he was handed his certificate, he looked up at the sky for a moment, whispering to himself, "We did it." But his story didn't end there. He returned to his hometown and began volunteering at a local legal aid office. He wasn't officially an attorney yet, but he helped connect poor families with lawyers and explain their rights. People trusted him. They knew his story, the boy who once stood up to a judge and turned the tables with nothing but truth.